There is an experience no one talks about in church, not because it is rare, because it is too embarrassing to name in public. It is the kind of thing you feel on a Sunday morning, on the church pew, surrounded by people you've known for decades, singing a hymn you memorized as a teenager, and realizing that the words are coming out of your mouth, but they're not coming from anywhere. Not because you stopped believing. You believe. Not because you are going through a crisis. There is no crisis. Life is reasonably stable. The kids are fine, your health is managed, retirement came as planned. It is precisely for this reason that the experience is so unsettling. You expected that when the crises passed, when the children grew up, when the bills stabilized, when the fast pace slowed down, you would finally feel what you always imagined you would feel. Fullness, access. The sense that the faith you practiced for decades had finally come home, and instead, inner silence. Not the good silence, the silence of an empty house that still has all the furniture in place. You look at the Bible and it's there. You pray and the words come out. You go to the service and participate. Everything is in the right place. And at the same time, there is something you cannot name that seems to have left, or that maybe never entered in the way you imagined it should. This emptiness has a name in the Gospel of John, and it is not the name of a spiritual disease, nor of hidden sin, nor of weak faith. It is the name of a condition that Jesus diagnosed with surgical precision in people who had everything religion could offer: ritual, doctrine, history, community, and yet were thirsty. Because there is a difference between knowing about the fountain and drinking from it, between knowing the address of the house and living in it, between having the map and inhabiting the territory. John is the only evangelist who records Jesus making this distinction explicitly, not as theological instruction, as a personal direct offer with a specific address to people who are exactly where you may be right now. Later on, we are going to pray a prayer that is different from any prayer you have ever prayed about this subject. Not a prayer asking for more faith, not a prayer confessing spiritual dryness, a prayer of habitation, the act of moving from knowing about the dwelling place to entering it, of receiving not information about Jesus, but the presence of Jesus. And there is a difference between the two that John spends his entire gospel describing. But first you need to understand what John saw, because John does not write as a theologian systematizing doctrines. He writes as an eyewitness who stayed so close to Jesus that he noticed what the other evangelists did not record. And what he noticed changes everything about what the emptiness you feel really means and what can fill it. Stay with me, because John's diagnosis is the most honest the New Testament offers for the experience you may never have heard anyone name out loud before. Open with me to John 7:37-39. But before reading the text, I need you to see the setting, because John is the only evangelist who understands that the setting changes the meaning of the words, and he documents the setting with the precision of someone who was there. It is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, the greatest feast in the Jewish calendar. 7 days of celebration in Jerusalem, commemorating the 40 years in the wilderness, when God provided water from the rock, manna from heaven, visible presence in the cloud and fire. The whole feast is a memorial of supernatural provision, and the central ritual of the feast is this. Every day for 7 days, the priest goes down to the pool of Siloam with a golden vessel, collects water, goes back up to the temple in procession, and pours the water over the altar while the people recite Isaiah 12:3. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. 7 days, 7 pourings, 7 collective declarations that God is the source. And on the last day, the day of greatest liturgical intensity, the climax of the entire celebration, Jesus stands up in the middle of the crowd and cries out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his innermost being will flow rivers of living water." Stop here. Jesus did not choose this moment by accident. He chose the day when the entire people were collectively declaring that God is the source of living water, and announced that the source has a personal address. It is not in the ritual. It is not in the collective declaration. It is not in the priest's golden vessel, nor in the water from the pool of Siloam. It is in him, and from there it flows into whoever drinks. And verse 39 of John is the detail that most readings pass over without processing. This he said about the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. Rivers, plural, not an occasional stream, not just enough moisture to survive. Rivers, potamoi in Greek, a word used for bodies of water that have their own movement, that run without you needing to push them, that have an origin beyond the point where you are, and the direction of the flow is inward to outward. Out of his innermost being, ektes koilias oto, literally from the belly, from the core, from the innermost place, not from the surface, not from performance, from the center. This is Jesus' diagnosis for the emptiness you feel. It is not absence of spiritual effort. It may be that you have more accumulated spiritual effort than most. It is absence of inner habitation. It is the difference between having the map of the fountain and being thirsty at the edge of the fountain. John is the only evangelist who systematically uses the language of dwelling, of habitation, of inner abiding. And he does this because he saw something the others saw, but did not record with this precision. John 14:23. Jesus says, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." Menō. Dwelling place, permanent habitation, not occasional visit. The same word Jesus uses in John 14:2 when he says, "In my Father's house are many rooms, dwelling places." It is not a word of passing through. It is a word of residence. And here is what John is documenting. The direction of the dwelling is not just you in God, you in prayer, you in the Word, you in the service. It is God in you. Father and Son making their home in the believer's interior. This is not poetic metaphor. John treats this as operational reality, as the mechanism by which the rivers flow, not because you produce them, but because the source dwells within and the rivers run from the inside out. The emptiness you feel is not evidence that you are far from God. It may be evidence that you have practiced religion as an external system, ritual, doctrine, behavior, without ever having received the inner habitation that John records Jesus offering. Now let's move on to John 15:4-5. Because here Jesus changes the metaphor, but keeps the same principle. Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. Menō, to remain, to dwell, to stay. It is John's habitation verb. It appears more than 40 times in his gospel. 40 times. No other evangelist uses it with this frequency, because John understands that the central issue is not what you do for God, but where you live in relation to God. And the vine metaphor is brutal in its clarity about emptiness. The branch that is not connected to the vine not only does not bear fruit, it withers. Not immediately, gradually. The process is silent at first. The branch still looks like a branch. It still has the right shape. It is still in the right place. But inside, without the flow of sap that comes from the vine, it is drying out. And here is the detail Jesus adds in verse 5. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Choris emu. Apart from me, outside of me, without me as your habitat. Auden. Absolutely nothing. Not a little, not less. Nothing that has real life, that produces real fruit, that comes from a real source. That includes prayer done without habitation. It includes Bible reading done without habitation. It includes service done without habitation. It includes decades of faithful religious practice done without habitation. It is not moral nothingness. It is vital nothingness. It is the difference between a connected branch that bears fruit without its own effort and a disconnected branch that works more intensely to produce what should flow naturally. And the intense work without natural flow is exactly what produces the specific fatigue that leads to the emptiness you feel. Not the fatigue of having done a lot, the fatigue of having tried to produce by the strength of the branch what only the sap of the vine can produce. Now we go to the text that is John's most precise diagnosis of the specific emptiness you feel. John 4. Jesus is at Jacob's well in Samaria. The woman arrives at noon, not early in the morning like the other women. She comes in the heat of the day because she is avoiding the other women. She carries something that isolates her. Jesus asks for water. She is surprised. Jews do not talk to Samaritans, and Jesus says something that changes the axis of the conversation. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Verse 10. She thinks of literal water. She asks about Jacob's well, a well with history, a well with authority, a well that served the patriarch and his sons and his flocks, a well approved by tradition. And Jesus answers in verses 13-14, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty. Rather, the water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Two types of water, two completely different mechanisms. Water from Jacob's well, page in Greek, a static spring, a reservoir that contains what has been collected. You drink, your thirst is satisfied temporarily, and the thirst returns. That is the cycle. The well does not change. The thirst does not change. You keep coming back. Water that Jesus gives becomes within the drinker a spring. Pege hudatos halomenu, a spring of water that leaps, that gushes, that has its own upward movement, not a reservoir, a source. The origin of the flow is inside, not outside. And here is the diagnosis for emptiness. You may have spent decades drinking from Jacob's well. Sunday service. You drink and the thirst decreases temporarily. Spiritual retreat. You drink and the thirst decreases for longer. A period of intense Bible reading. You drink and the thirst decreases. But the thirst returns, it always returns, because the mechanism is external. You have to keep coming back to the well. Jesus is not offering a better well. He is offering a transformation of the mechanism, from the thirst that returns to the spring that wells up, from the external that you seek to the internal that flows. The Samaritan woman understands this, not immediately, but gradually over the course of the conversation. And when she understands, she no longer asks for water from the well. She leaves the water jar behind. The instrument of external collection becomes unnecessary when the source is internal. John 17 is the most important chapter for understanding the complete diagnosis, because here Jesus prays. He does not teach, does not instruct, does not debate. He prays. And what he asks the Father in verse 21 is the most explicit statement of habitation that John records, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be in us. And verse 23, I in them and you in me, not they in you, I in them. The habitation has a specific direction. The presence goes inside. And this inner presence is what produces unity, fruit, rivers, not external effort, internal habitation. Now I can precisely name what the emptiness you feel is indicating. It is not that you are far from God. It is not that your faith is weak. It is not that you sinned in some way that blocked access. It is that you may have built an extraordinarily well-equipped religious life on the outside, practice, service, knowledge, community, without having made the specific move that John records Jesus offering, to receive inner habitation. To allow the fountain to be installed within instead of continuing to return to the external well. And there is a reason why this specific move is difficult for people with decades of Christian life. It is counterintuitive, because decades of practice teach that you produce spiritual results through spiritual effort. You pray more to be closer to God. You read more to know more of God. You serve more to be more useful to God. But John is documenting something radically different. You receive, you drink, you abide. And what you could not produce with any amount of effort, the rivers, the fruit, the fullness, all flows naturally when habitation is established. The branch does not produce grapes, it abides, and the vine produces grapes through the branch. This distinction between producing and abiding, between seeking and receiving, between returning to the well and inhabiting the fountain, is what the prayer we will pray together is going to establish, not as a concept, as operational reality. Let's go to situations in modern life. Let me describe 2 living rooms on a Friday night. The first belongs to Nelson, 68 years old, retired for 3 years from a 35-year career as a civil engineer, married for 41 years, 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren, faithful member of the same congregation for 32 years, led a small group for 17 of those years, gave tithe consistently, served on the church administrative board, knows the Bible better than most pastors who have ever heard of him, and Nelson is sitting on the couch staring out the window without seeing anything in particular. His wife is in the bedroom reading. The house is quiet. It is an ordinary Friday night. There has been no bad news today, no crisis, no disturbing diagnosis. Life is objectively good. And Nelson is feeling what he has never told anyone in 32 years in the same congregation. Nothing. Not sadness, not depression, not theological doubt, nothing. An absence that has no name, that has no identifiable cause, that has no obvious solution because there is no obvious problem to solve. He goes to the Bible and finds verses he knows by heart. He prays and the words come out right. He goes to the Sunday service and participates genuinely. He sings, listens, greets people. And on Monday morning he is back on the couch with the same feeling of an empty house that has all the furniture in place and no one living there. The explanation Nelson gives himself is silent, not verbalized even to his wife. Maybe this is what mature faith feels like. Maybe the fervor of youth really shouldn't continue. Maybe I've reached a plateau of adult faith where feeling doesn't matter anymore. That sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. It sounds like someone who has outgrown dependence on emotional experience, but that is not what is happening with Nelson. What is happening with Nelson is that he has built over 32 years an extraordinarily well-equipped religious life on the outside and has never made the move John records Jesus offering. He has never received habitation. He has never stopped returning to the well to drink and allowed the fountain to be installed inside. He has drunk many times with admirable consistency, and the thirst has always returned, and he has always gone back to the well, and he has called this cycle spiritual discipline. But the water from Jacob's well does not satisfy permanently. Jesus said this explicitly, and Nelson, who memorized John 4, never applied the diagnosis to himself because the diagnosis seemed to be for the Samaritan woman, a person with a compromised moral history, a person clearly in need. Not for a small group leader of 32 years with a marked-up Bible and a consistent tithing record. The irony is that Nelson's religiosity is precisely what makes the diagnosis difficult, because his well has far more historical authority than the Samaritan woman's. It is Jacob's well plus the well of evangelical tradition, plus the well of 3 decades of faithful service. It is a well with extraordinary credentials, and it is still a well. The second living room belongs to Irene, 62 years old, widowed for 5 years, 2 adult children who live in other cities. She worked for 28 years as a social worker, decades of caring for others with few resources and a lot of wear and tear. She reached retirement exhausted in a way she did not know how to name. Irene had what she described as functional faith. She believed. She went to church. She prayed. But there was an honesty in her that Nelson did not have. She knew something was missing. She did not know what, but she knew. And it was this honesty that made her receptive when an older friend, an 81-year-old woman with a quality of presence Irene could not explain, said something that changed her trajectory. You're trying to drink from the well when Jesus is offering to install the fountain. They are 2 completely different things. And as long as you keep going back to the well, you will keep being thirsty. Irene did not understand immediately, but the sentence stayed. And she began to investigate the Gospel of John with a different question than she had always asked. Not what should I do, but what should I receive? And she found the menō, the abiding, the dwelling, the 40 uses of the habitation verb in the only gospel that understands that the issue is not what you do for God, but where you live in relation to Him. Irene did not have a dramatic experience. There was no moment of intense emotional catharsis. There was a period of weeks in which she stopped going to the well with her jar, stopped approaching prayer as external water collection, and began to practice what John calls abiding, staying, dwelling. And gradually, not all at once, not dramatically, something changed. not the outer life. The outer life remained identical. The same house, the same structural loneliness of widowhood, the same children in other cities, the same retirement without the husband who had planned retirement with her. What changed was the quality of presence inside the life that did not change. Irene began to wake up with something she did not know how to name, but recognized as different, as if someone were home, not manufactured feeling, real presence, inner. The fountain that wells up instead of the well you visit. And it was Irene, not Nelson, with his 3 decades of formal leadership, who sat with her 23-year-old granddaughter, who was going through her first major adult crisis, and said something the granddaughter kept. You don't need to find God outside of you. He wants to live inside you, and there is a difference between the two that changes everything. The granddaughter did not fully understand at that moment, but she kept it. And when that crisis passed and another came, she went back to her grandmother. Not because her grandmother had the right answers, because there was something in Irene that she wanted. She could not name it, but she wanted it. Real presence produces real attraction, not because of the quality of the argument, because of the quality of the inhabitant. There is a form of postponement that is unique to people with a long history of religious life. And it is especially resistant to treatment because it disguises itself as spiritual maturity. It is called feeling doesn't matter anymore. It is the posture Nelson developed, consciously or not, to explain emptiness without having to confront it directly. Mature faith does not depend on feeling. Mature faith is commitment of the will independent of emotional experience. Mature faith is what you do when you don't feel anything. There is real truth in this posture. Faith is not an emotional thermometer. Commitment of the will is real and valuable. But John is not talking about feeling. He is talking about habitation. And habitation is not feeling, it is reality. It is the difference between an empty house and a lived-in house, between presence and absence, between the fountain that wells up and the well you visit. And the absence of habitation is not evidence of maturity. It is evidence that the specific move Jesus offers at the well of Sychar to receive the water that becomes a spring has never been made with enough clarity to install what it installs. Nelson is not being mature by accepting the emptiness. He is being deprived of something that is available and that Jesus explicitly offered as possible. And by calling deprivation maturity, he is preventing the correct diagnosis. Irene was honest about the thirst. And honesty about the thirst is what made it possible to receive the fountain. You may already have at least 3 objections to what I'm telling you. The first, I already received the Holy Spirit when I was converted. That already happened. Correct. And John is not talking about conversion, he is talking about habitation. Menō, abiding. Conversion is the door. Habitation is living inside the house the door gives access to. You may have gone through the door decades ago and been living in the hallway ever since. The invitation of John 15 is not to convert, it is to abide. And abiding is a continuous act, not a one-time event. Abide in me is in the present imperative, continuous action, habitual position, permanent state, not enter once, stay. The second, I don't know how to do that. Abiding sounds too abstract to be practical. John anticipated this objection. And the answer is in John 15:7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you. The word that dwells is the mechanism of habitation, not the word read as information to be processed, the word received as an inhabitant, as a presence that installs itself, that makes a home, that begins to interpret reality from the inside out. The practical difference is this. When you read John 15:5 and think, what a useful instruction about spiritual dependence, the word passed by you. When you read John 15:5 and stop and receive it and say, this reality is for me now as an inhabitant within me, the word begins to dwell. It is the difference between reading about the house and entering it. The third, and most honest, I've already tried this. I've already sought the presence of God. I've practiced contemplation. I've gone on retreats. I've prayed for hours. And the emptiness continued. This objection deserves a more direct response. What you tried was seeking. John is not describing seeking, he is describing receiving, and there is a difference between the two positions that is fundamental. Seeking presupposes that what you want is outside of you, and you need to find it. Receiving presupposes that what you want is being offered, and you need to stop looking long enough to stretch out your hands. Irene did not find habitation by seeking more intensely. She found it by stopping going to the well with her jar and recognizing that Jesus was offering to install the fountain. These are movements in opposite directions. Seeking goes outward, receiving opens inward. And decades of intense seeking can create a movement pattern that makes receiving difficult. Because you are so used to going toward God that the posture of receiving God coming toward you feels too passive, too simple, almost suspicious. But John 4:10 is explicit. If you knew the gift of God, Doria, free gift given without condition of merit, you would have asked him, and he would have given you. You would have asked, you would have received. Not, you would have found after sufficient seeking. You would have received after an honest request. There is something no one names directly for people in your stage of life about inner emptiness and legacy. Your children and grandchildren will not inherit your doctrine about the presence of God. They will inherit the quality of presence you demonstrated having, or not having, in the everyday moments that seem insignificant and are the only ones that remain. Nelson can quote John 15 perfectly. He can explain the theology of the vine with admirable precision, and at the same time his grandchildren will notice the huge difference between what Grandpa preaches and how he reacts in life. Irene will not leave a theological system. She will leave the memory of a quality of presence that her granddaughter cannot name but cannot forget. The sense that being with Grandma was being with someone who was not alone, even when she was. That there was someone home when you entered Irene's space. This quality cannot be performed, it cannot be studied until you produce it, it cannot be accumulated through external religious effort. It comes from real habitation, from the fountain that wells up from within instead of the well you visit. And it is transferable in ways no theological instruction can ever be. Because what Irene's granddaughter will keep is not what her grandmother said about the presence of God. It is the memory of what it was like to be in her grandmother's presence, and the question that memory will create in some future crisis: what did she have that I want? That question is the most fertile seed you can plant, and it only grows if the habitation is real. Nelson can still make the move. It is not too late. Jacob's well is admirable, but Jesus' offer in verse 14 has no expiration date. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring. In him. Inside. Now. The jar can still be left behind. The fountain can still be installed. And the prayer we are going to pray together now is not about seeking more. It is about receiving what is being offered, and has been offered since the day Jesus stood up on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles and cried out to the crowd who knew by heart all the verses about the fountain and yet remained thirsty. Before we pray, I need you to do one thing, and this time it will be different. Sit down. Do not stand up this time. This is not the posture of inspection, nor of witness, nor of engineer. It is the posture of someone who is at home, of someone who does not need to go anywhere to find what is being offered here, now in this moment. Sit down, back supported, hands open on your lap, not closed, not tense. Open. It is the physical posture of receiving, not of producing, not of effort, not of seeking, of receiving what is being offered. Take a deep breath once, not as a technique, as recognition that you are here, present, and that what Jesus offered at the well of Sychar is being offered now in this room to you. Ready? Then begin to inhabit. Father, I come before you not with accumulated effort to present, not with a list of disciplines practiced or services rendered or years of faithfulness as credentials for access. I come with thirst, and I come with the honesty the Samaritan woman had before me. The honesty to recognize that the well I have been visiting, no matter how much historical authority it has, no matter how much it has served patriarchs and whole congregations, is still a well. And the well does not permanently satisfy. Jesus said this, and I have the evidence of my own decades. So today I do not come with the jar. I do not come to collect enough to make it until the next visit. I come to receive what you offered on the last day of the feast, when you stood up in the middle of the crowd that knew by heart all the verses about the fountain and still remained thirsty, and cried out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. I am thirsty. I come. I drink. Lord, I name now what the emptiness has been, not as a confession of failure, as an honest diagnosis that opens the way for the correct treatment. For a long time I have practiced religion as an external system. I have gone to the well with admirable consistency. I have returned with enough water for the week. And the following week I went back again, and I called this cycle spiritual discipline. And there was real faithfulness in this cycle. I do not deny it. You have honored this faithfulness in ways I can document. But there was thirst that did not go away. There was an emptiness that the well did not fill. There was a house with all the furniture in place and no one living there. And today I name this for what John says it is. Absence of habitation, not absence of faith, not absence of effort. Absence of the specific move you offered, to receive the water that becomes a spring, not to visit the spring that is outside. I name this, without shame, with the same honesty the Samaritan woman had when she did not try to hide the thirst. Now, Lord, I make the request Jesus said I would make if I knew the gift of God. If you knew the gift of God, you would have asked him, and he would have given you, I ask. Not with religious elaboration, with the simplicity of someone who is thirsty and there is a fountain being offered. I ask for the habitation that John documents on every page of his gospel, not the visit, the dwelling, the mun of John 14:23, Father and Son making permanent residence in the interior, not occasional presence that I have to go fetch. I ask for the water that becomes a spring, the spring that wells up from inside out, that has its own movement, that does not depend on me returning to the well in order to exist. I ask for the menō of John 15, not the effort to abide by force of will, but the receiving of habitation that makes abiding natural, like a branch that does not need to exert effort to be in the vine when it is grafted into it. I ask for this now, not as a request for some future moment after accumulating enough merit, now, because the gift of God is not accumulated merit, it is dorea, free gift, offered, available to be received. Lord, I receive now. I receive the habitation. I am not seeking, I am receiving. These are movements in opposite directions and I choose the correct direction now. I open the interior, not the surface of the religious life everyone sees, but the center, the innermost place from which Jesus said the rivers would flow, and I receive. You make your home here, not as a guest who needs renewed invitation every week, as an inhabitant, as what John 14:23 describes, Father and Son who came and stayed. I receive this as reality, not as aspiration, not as theological hope for someday, as operational reality that begins now, and that the thirst I feel is exactly the sign that I am ready to receive. Lord, I now decree the menō over my life. I abide in you, not by willpower that will fade on Monday morning, by established position, a branch grafted into the vine, not a branch trying to hold on by its own strength. And I receive the promise of John 15:5 over every area of my life. The fruit I could not produce through decades of external effort will begin to appear naturally, like grapes that are not the branch's work, but the flow of the vine's sap. Not more intense effort, more real habitation. I decree over the emptiness I felt. It was not evidence of spiritual maturity that outgrew the need to feel. It was the correct diagnosis of absence of habitation. And today the diagnosis received the correct treatment. The house is not empty. You have made your home. And what was empty will become a spring. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with the inevitability of a branch that is in the vine. The fruit comes because the connection is established, not because the branch worked to produce it. Now, Father, I pray for those I carry in my heart, for the children and grandchildren who are at a distance, not just geographically, but the inner distance of those who have never heard anyone name the difference between visiting the well and inhabiting the fountain. I decree that the habitation I am receiving now will produce in me the kind of presence that plants the right question in them. Not the question, why does my father go to church, but what does my father have that I want? For the loneliness that sometimes weighs, the quiet house, the empty hours, the absence of those who are no longer here. I decree that habitation transforms the silence, not because the absence disappears, but because the silence of a lived-in house is different from the silence of an empty house, and you have made your home here. For the people in my congregation whom I know are experiencing the same emptiness I had, who go to the well faithfully, who return with enough water for the week, who have never heard anyone name the difference between the cycle of the well and the habitation of the fountain. I decree that the quality of presence I will begin to demonstrate will plant in at least one of them the question that opens the correct diagnosis. Father, I close with the scene John saved for the end of the last day of the feast. The crowd has the verses from Isaiah on their lips. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. The priest has just poured the water on the altar for the 7th time. The ritual is complete. The memory is honored. The form is perfect. And you stood up in the middle of them and cried out. You did not whisper. You cried out. With the urgency of one who knows that the crowd is leaving satisfied with the ritual and still thirsty. If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. I hear this cry today, not as a decorative Sunday sermon verse, as a direct personal offer with a specific address to me now in this room, and I come and I drink, and I receive the water that becomes a spring. And the spring that wells up from my interior will be the most eloquent testimony I have ever given. Not because I said the right words, but because someone is home, and the people who know me will notice. Not all of them immediately, but they will notice. In the name of Jesus Christ, the same one who stood up on the last day of the feast and cried out to those who were thirsty, the same one who sat by Jacob's well in the heat of midday and waited for someone who came with a jar and needed a fountain, the same one who said, "Abide in me," not as an instruction of effort, but as an invitation to habitation. The same one who prays to the Father in chapter 17, "I in them." Not they trying to reach me, but I inside them. Amen. Your assignment for the next 24 hours is this. This afternoon or tonight, sit in silence for 10 minutes, not with your Bible open, not with a prayer list, not with anything to produce or collect or process. Just sitting, with your hands open on your lap, and say one sentence out loud. You have made your home here. Not as an affirmation of something you need to convince yourself of, as acknowledgement of something that has just been received. Like someone who has just entered the house and says, "I'm home," not to convince the walls, but because it is true. And naming what is true has weight that silence does not have. 10 minutes, one sentence, out loud. And if during those 10 minutes your mind tries to go to the to-do list, to tomorrow's worry, to the question of whether you are doing it right, you do not argue. You come back. You have made your home here. It is the anchor. It is the address. It is the point of return. Not because feeling will confirm reality, because reality does not depend on feeling to be real. A lived-in house is a lived-in house, regardless of how the inhabitant feels on Tuesday morning. Now think of someone you know who is in the cycle of the well, who goes faithfully, who returns with enough water, who has never heard anyone name the difference between visiting the fountain and inhabiting the fountain, who may be calling emptiness spiritual maturity, because it is the most available explanation for something that has never been correctly diagnosed. Send this video now, without a long explanation, just the video, and maybe, "I thought of you." Because sometimes the most precise gift you can give someone is not a conversation about the presence of God. It is the tool that names the difference between well and fountain in a way 3 decades of sermons on the subject have never named with such specificity. And now I need to prepare you for what comes next. Today, you received John's diagnosis for inner emptiness and the specific move that installs habitation. You made the request. You received. The fountain was installed. But there is something no one tells you about what happens after the fountain is installed. The world around you does not stop. Notifications keep coming. The news cycle keeps spinning. The speed of life that you thought would slow down in retirement and that in reality merely changed form. The grandkids with their screens, the children with impossible schedules, you yourself with constant access to everything. This speed does not respect the habitation you have just received. And there is a specific law that Jesus teaches in John about how to protect the inner space where habitation has been established. Not as a behavior rule, as ecology, the set of conditions that allows the fountain to keep welling up instead of being suffocated by constant external noise. John records Jesus deliberately creating this space throughout his entire ministry, and the pattern John records is not accidental. It is operational instruction for those who have just received habitation and need to know how to live in a world that is permanently trying to pull their attention outward. How to have the peace of Jesus in a world full of notifications. That is the question of the next video. And John's answer is not turn off your phone. It is deeper, more durable, and more applicable than any attention management advice you have ever received. Turn on the notification bell now. Because what John saw Jesus do to protect the inner space is exactly what you need, so that what you receive today is not suffocated by tomorrow's pace. The fountain is installed, the inhabitant is home,